the town square, heart of Ashton, and she, its silent guardian, the Veiled Woman. A statue, draped in bronze, her face forever hidden. Some whispered she was a grieving widow, others a fallen angel. No one knew for sure. But everyone felt her presence, cold, imposing, a monolith in the bustling town. Generations passed, children played at her feet, lovers stole kisses beneath her gaze. The Veiled Woman saw it all, her silence, a story untold, a fixture in the tapestry of Ashton, a constant reminder of the past, or so they thought. Life in Ashton was simple, predictable, until it wasn't. Until she moved, the Veiled Woman, a shift in her stance, a slight turn of her head, barely noticeable, easily dismissed, but something had changed, and the town felt it. Old Maggie, with eyes that saw more than most, noticed it first. "She's different," she croaked, pointing a gnarled finger at the statue. People scoffed, dismissed her ramblings. Old age, they said, but doubt like a seed began to grow. Then came the whispers. The baker swore he saw the glint of metal beneath the veil. The blacksmith, that her arm was raised higher, each tale more outlandish than the last. Fear, potent and contagious, spread through the town. The Veiled Woman, once a symbol of comfort, now instilled dread. The town council, in an attempt to quell the rising panic, dismissed the rumors. Tricks of the light, they claimed, nothing more. But even their words lacked conviction. They too felt the shift, the unease. The Veiled Woman was changing and no one knew why. Each morning brought a fresh wave of terror, the Veiled Woman's position more pronounced, her stance more menacing. The whispers grew louder, the fear more palpable. Ashton, once vibrant, became shrouded in an eerie silence. The once dismissed stories of old Maggie now echoed in the minds of every townsperson. Her warnings, once ignored, now held a terrifying weight. The Veiled Woman was no longer a passive observer, she was an active participant in their nightmare, and the town held its breath, waiting for the next change. The sun, once a welcome sight, now cast long, ominous shadows. The statue's shadow, longer and more distorted than before, seemed to stretch out, reaching for the terrified townspeople. Ashton, once bathed in sunlight, was now cloaked in fear. The night was still, unnaturally so. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Above, the moon, full and heavy, cast an eerie glow on Ashton. Its light fell upon the Veiled Woman, illuminating her bronze form with an unsettling radiance. Then, a sound, a soft, grinding noise like stone on stone. It emanated from the town square, the heart of Ashton, where the Veiled Woman stood. The sound, though faint, was enough to stir the townspeople from their uneasy slumber. A window creaked open, then another. Soon, curious eyes peered from behind curtains, drawn to the unsettling sound in the square. Fear, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. The Veiled Woman had always been a silent guardian. Now she was making her presence known. Young Thomas, restless from a nightmare, was the first to see it. He stood at his bedroom window, his small frame almost swallowed by the darkness. His eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, were fixed on the Veiled. There, beneath the moonlit veil, a change. The fabric, once opaque, now revealed a sliver of the face beneath, a glimpse of cold, hard metal, a cheekbone sharp and angular, a jawline strong and unforgiving. Void of life, yet it seemed to pulse with a chilling energy. Thomas gasped, his small hand flying to his mouth to stifle a scream. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His mind struggled to comprehend what his eyes were seeing. The Veiled Woman, her face always hidden, was revealing herself, and what lay beneath was not human. The news spread like wildfire, whispered from house to house, carried on the backs of fear-stricken whispers. The Veiled Woman had moved. Her face, or at least a part of it, was visible. The impossible had become terrifyingly real. By dawn, the town square was teeming with anxious townspeople. They stood at a safe distance, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and dread, their gazes fixed on the statue. The Veiled Woman, once a symbol of their history, now stood as a harbinger of their fear. The air crackled with nervous energy. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, each whisper fueling the growing sense of unease. The veiled woman, no longer a passive observer, had become an enigma, her presence demanding attention, her silence more unsettling than any scream. The town council, their faces pale and drawn, arrived to assess the situation. They too seemed unnerved by the sight of the partially revealed statue. Their reassurances, usually met with nods and agreements, now fell on deaf ears. The fear was palpable, a living, breathing entity that had taken root in their midst. A group of brave or perhaps foolish young men decided to get a closer look. They approached the statue cautiously, their steps hesitant, their eyes darting between the statue and the anxious faces of the crowd. Each step forward was a victory over their mounting fear. As they drew nearer, the metallic gleam beneath the veil seemed to intensify. The eye, cold and lifeless, seemed to follow their every move. They stopped just a few feet away, their courage faltering as they stared up at the imposing figure. They were close enough to see the intricate details of the metal face, the sharp lines and angles that seemed more machine than human. Days crawled by, each one a torment. The veil continued its agonizingly slow retreat. Each sunrise revealed more of the face beneath, each glimpse a fresh wave of terror. The townsfolk were trapped in a macabre spectacle, forced to witness the unveiling of their doom. The once hidden face was now alarmingly visible. It was not human, not entirely, a fusion of flesh and metal, cold and lifeless, yet undeniably alive. The eyes, twin orbs of polished silver, seemed to follow their every move, a constant unsettling gaze that pierced the very core of their being. Fear was now a tangible presence in Ashton, a thick fog that clung to the cobblestone streets and seeped into their homes. Sleep offered no escape, haunted by nightmares of the veiled woman, her metal hand reaching out from the shadows, her cold metallic voice whispering their names. The night the statue moved its hand, a hush fell over Ashton. It was a stillness, born of pure terror. The grinding of stone against stone, louder this time, echoed through the empty streets, each scrape like fingernails on a chalkboard, setting teeth on edge. Panic seized the town. People poured out of their homes, their faces white with fear, their eyes drawn to the town square. There, bathed in the cold moonlight, stood the veiled woman. Her arm, once resting by her side, was now outstretched, her metal finger pointing accusingly towards the terrified townsfolk. A collective gasp escaped the crowd. The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared to speak, to breathe. The veiled woman, once a silent sentinel, was now an active threat, her presence a suffocating weight on their chests. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. The statue continued to shift, its movements subtle yet undeniably deliberate. A turn of the head, a tilt of the body, each change ratcheting up the tension in Ashton. Whispers of curses and ancient evils filled the taverns. Theories, each more outlandish than the last, spread like wildfire. Some spoke of vengeful spirits, others of demonic possessions. But no one had a rational explanation for the terrifying phenomenon unfolding before their eyes. The town council, their faces etched with helplessness, were at a loss. They called in experts, scholars, and even priests, but none could offer a logical explanation, let alone a solution. The veiled woman, once a source of pride, now held their fate in her metal grip. Section 4. The Metal Gaze. Then came the whispers about the eyes. The silver orbs, cold and lifeless, seemed to follow people as they moved about the square. A chilling sensation, like being watched by an unseen predator, sent shivers down their spines. People began avoiding the town square, their fear turning into a tangible barrier. One by one, the townsfolk succumbed to paranoia. Their once peaceful lives were consumed by the ever-present threat of the veiled woman. Fear became the lifeblood of Ashton, coursing through its veins, poisoning its very core. Even within their homes, they couldn't escape the chilling gaze. The silver eyes seemed to pierce through walls, their cold stare burning into their souls. Sleep became a distant memory replaced by a constant state of terror. Section 5. A town divided. The once strong community began to fracture under the weight of fear. Suspicions ran rampant, fueled by paranoia and desperation. Neighbors turned on neighbors, accusing each other of summoning the evil that had gripped their town. The town council, their authority waning, became desperate. They called for calm, for unity, but their words fell on deaf ears. The fear was too deeply rooted, the paranoia too pervasive. Ashton, once a beacon of hope, was now a town teetering on the brink of madness. The veiled woman, with her slow, deliberate movements and her chilling metal gaze, had achieved what no outside force ever could. She had shattered their unity, their spirit, their very sense of self. Ashton was no longer a town but a collection of terrified souls, bound together by fear and mistrust. Section 1. The Summoning of Experts. The council, desperate, resorted to drastic measures. Scholars, their faces etched with skepticism, were summoned from distant cities. They arrived with their books and instruments, their eyes narrowed in suspicion. The townsfolk watched, a mixture of hope and fear flickering in their eyes. These men of science, with their logic and reason, were a stark contrast to the growing hysteria that had gripped Ashton. They examined the statue, their faces impassive, their instruments clicking and whirring. They measured, they analyzed, they whispered amongst themselves in hushed tones. Days stretched into nights, and still, the scholars offered no answers. Their faces, once confident, now mirrored the growing despair of the town. The veiled woman held her secrets close, her metal gaze a mocking challenge to their intellect. The townsfolk, their hope dwindling, retreated further into fear. Theories, wild and varied, filled the void left by the scholars' silence. Ancient curses, vengeful spirits, gateways to other realms, each more outlandish than the last. The taverns, once filled with laughter and song, now echoed with hushed whispers of dread. One theory, whispered in hushed tones, spoke of a forgotten deity, imprisoned within the bronze. A being of immense power, awakened by a careless word or a misplaced glance. It was a tale spun from fear and desperation, yet it resonated with the growing sense of helplessness that permeated Ashton. The elders of the town, their faces etched with the wisdom of ages, spoke of a time before the statue. A time when the land was wild and untamed, ruled by forces beyond human comprehension. Forces that could be appeased, but never controlled. Forces that had awakened. One man, a historian shunned for his unorthodox theories, claimed to have found a clue. An ancient text hidden away in the archives of a long-forgotten library spoke of a ritual, a sacrifice made to appease a dark entity, its form forever bound to a bronze effigy. His words, once dismissed as the ramblings of a madman, now held a terrifying weight. The townsfolk, desperate for answers, clung to his every word. Could this be the explanation they sought? Could a single act of sacrifice appease the entity that haunted their town? The historian, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity, warned of the consequences of inaction. The entity, he claimed, would not be sated by their fear alone. It craved a more tangible offering, a life for a life, a soul for a soul, the price of their continued existence. The town, once a place of warmth and camaraderie, transformed into a crucible of suspicion. Fear, like a venomous serpent, coiled around their hearts, squeezing the life out of their once vibrant community. Trust evaporated, replaced by a chilling paranoia that infected every interaction. Eyes darted nervously in the shadows, searching for any sign of the unseen threat. Whispers followed them like phantoms, accusing, condemning, amplifying their darkest fears. The weight of their collective dread pressed down upon them, suffocating any hope of normalcy. The once familiar streets, now shrouded in an eerie silence, seemed to twist and turn with malicious intent, leading them astray, trapping them in a labyrinth of their own making. Every corner held the potential for terror, every shadow concealed a lurking menace. They were prisoners in their own town, haunted by the specter of the veiled woman. Section 5. The Night of the Sacrifice. A decision, born of desperation and fueled by fear, was made. The townsfolk, their faces pale and drawn, gathered in the square. The air, thick with tension and the smell of incense, crackled with anticipation. The historian, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and conviction, led the ritual. A young woman, her eyes wide with terror, was chosen. A sacrifice to appease the entity, to restore balance to their shattered world. She trembled, a lone figure bathed in the flickering light of torches, her fate sealed by their desperation. As the ritual reached its climax, a hush fell over the crowd. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The statue, bathed in the eerie glow of the torches, seemed to pulsate, its metal skin shimmering with an unnatural light. The veiled woman was awake. Section 1. Vanishing Act. The chanting reached fever pitch. The torches flared, casting grotesque shadows that danced with the darkness. Then, silence. Absolute, consuming. The air, thick with anticipation, crackled with unseen energy. The townsfolk, their faces a tapestry of terror and hope, held their breath. The veiled woman stood impassive, cold metal gleaming under the flickering torchlight. The sacrifice, a young woman named Anya, trembled. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted between the looming statue and the masked figures surrounding her. A tear rolled down her cheek, a single bead of despair reflecting the firelight. And then, it happened. Not with a bang, but a whisper. A subtle distortion of air, a ripple in the moonlight. The veiled woman was gone, vanished. The space she occupied, now empty. The townsfolk, their eyes wide with disbelief, stared at the spot where their nightmare had stood moments before. A collective gasp, a wave of shock and confusion swept through the square. Whispers, hesitant at first, then growing in volume, filled the night. Where had she gone? What had happened to Anya? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, echoing the growing fear. The historian, his face ashen, stumbled back, his eyes frantically searching the empty space where the statue once stood. His words, the ancient prophecies he'd unearthed, now mocked him. Had he been wrong? Had they traded one horror for another, unknown, perhaps even more terrifying? The torches, their flames dancing in the night wind, cast grotesque shadows that stretched and contorted, reflecting the turmoil within each heart. The silence was broken only by the crackling of the flames and the rising murmur of the crowd, their fear a palpable presence in the cold night air. Then, a new sound. A soft metallic clinking like chains dragging across stone. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The townsfolk, their blood running cold, spun around, their eyes searching the darkness for the source of the chilling sound. And there, in the space where the veiled woman had stood, a figure began to materialize. Anya. But she was different. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now glowed with an unnatural light, cold and metallic. Her hand, once soft and trembling, was now encased in bronze, the fingers ending in sharp, pointed claws. The veil, the very symbol of their terror, was lifting. But what lay beneath was not salvation, not redemption. It was the horrifying truth of their sacrifice. They had not appeased the entity, they had empowered it, and it had chosen its new vessel, Anya, the girl they had offered to the darkness. Dawn broke over Ashton, painting the sky with hues of gray and purple. The torches in the square had long since burned out, leaving behind only wisps of smoke. The townsfolk, their faces haggard, had retreated to their homes, each locked door a testament to their shattered unity. The square, once bustling with activity, stood eerily deserted. The silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. The veiled woman was gone, but the terror she unleashed remained. The cobblestone streets, still wet from the morning mist, seemed to whisper Anya's name. The whispers now carried the weight of a horrifying truth. The entity they sought to appease had not been vanquished. It had merely changed its form, its essence now intertwined with the soul of an innocent. The veiled woman was never the true source of their terror. She was a symbol, a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. The true horror lay in their hearts, in their willingness to sacrifice one of their own. They sought answers in ancient texts and rituals, but the truth couldn't be found in dusty tomes or flickering candlelight. It lay in the shattered remnants of their community, the veil lifted to expose the darkness beneath their world. The truth, unveiled and undeniable, was a bitter pill to swallow. They were not alone in the universe. Some things, once awakened, could never be put back to sleep. The veiled woman was gone, but Anya would forever be bound to the entity they had unleashed. Some mysteries are best left unsolved, some doors best left unopened. For the truth, once revealed, can be more terrifying than any nightmare.